Resident Evil Outbreak was a rumored upcoming multiplayer video game that was going to be developed and published by Capcom. Rumors have circulated around the title for the past few years, and the game has also been compared and referenced as Resident Evil Revelations 3. Let's break down what details were leaked about the game, platform exclusivity, and why the game was cancelled. As always, all the sources will be linked in the description below, so make sure to check those out and support those original writers. And with that out of the way, let's get into why Resident Evil Outrage was cancelled. Let me start by saying this video does contain information from insiders and is more rumor heavy than other videos. I try to cover information from sources I trust, but at the end of the day, it comes down to whether or not you trust sources that claim to have information that isn't available to the public. This is also important to note because different insiders have conflicting information at this point. Moving on, this video is also a pseudo sequel to a video I made in December of 2020, which covered all the leaked information around Resident Evil Revelations 3. The video is a good starting point for this title and gives the context around the Capcom leak that happened in 2020 and sets the groundwork for understanding this video, so I will link that video down below. Now let's move on to the leaks and rumors. After my last video was released, the first insider we will talk about, Dustgolem, who we have discussed multiple times on this channel, made a Twitter thread in December of 2020 about Revelations 3. He said the game has been in development since 2017, and he always heard the game was going to star Rebecca Chambers. And the game that was going to use the Nintendo Switch as the launch platform was always the game with Rebecca. This claim is not out of the question, considering the first Resident Evil Revelations game was also a 3DS timed exclusive. Dustgolem continued on in 2021 and said that Revelations 3 would be released within a year of Resident Evil Village, and the game would probably not be called Revelations 3, and would instead be called Resident Evil Outrage. And he still says the game is expected to be a Switch timed exclusive, and they guess the game will release late 2021 or early 2022. The information from Dustgolem continued throughout February of 2021. He says that Outrage is developed using the RE engine and will be compatible with the Switch, similar to how Monster Hunter Rise worked on the Switch. They say the graphics won't look the best, but it still will be a great game on the platform. Moving on, the game was also supposed to be a timed exclusive and will release on everything, and is allegedly a cross-generation game. And the final tweet I want to mention from this February timeframe has to do with the budget for the game. Dustgolem claims Outrage has a higher budget and more development time compared to Revelations 1 or 2. The game has supposedly been in development for 4 years and has a budget close to Resident Evil Village, which is part of the reason why Dustgolem thinks Capcom is moving away from the Revelations naming, so fans don't associate this game with previous entries. And they close out by saying the game will be more like a Code Veronica game than a Revelations game in terms of quality. Dustgolem didn't talk about the game again until May of 2021 and released a few additional details and speculation. They say getting information on Outrage is not as clear as Resident Evil Village information, and it's possible that it's because the game is being developed by a ghostwriter game development studio called TOSE or TOSE. They are the same studio who created Revelations 1 and 2, and Capcom still assists in development, but not to the same extent as with other games. The thread continues on and mentions that Rebecca Chambers did have an Asian actress scanned in to play the character as well. Then we get a massive article from the Biohazard Declassified team in June of 2021, and they discuss everything they know about Outrage. A lot of the information is similar to the information from Dustgolem that I have already covered in this video, but they also heard a 1-hour playtest was conducted for the project under the codename Investigation. The direct quote says, "The Resident Evil Outrage investigation playtest starts at night with Rebecca outside the gates of a college campus, where she is investigating the creation of another new virus. Once on the campus, there was a lot of room to walk around and explore, and even students to interact with who are frightened. It wasn't specified, but my assumption would be these interactions take place during cutscenes. After exploring the courtyard of the campus, you eventually end up in the college's library, where you find a note saying the school's director is in contact with a company regarding the research. After reading the files, an infected student then attacks Rebecca with scissors, and you're given the opportunity to either fight or run, a usual Resident Evil trope. Fighting results in receiving a locker key, though it isn't stated what was in the locker. From there, you continue deeper into the main part of the college, where you can start exploring rooms such as labs, classrooms, bathrooms, and a cafeteria, all with infected teachers and students that, according to the source, act very much like Resident Evil 5 Mangini and use school-based weapons. While exploring, you eventually come across a key to an office, and upon entering the room, a man comes up behind Rebecca and renders her unconscious, ending the playtest. He closes out by saying the playtesting was done on a Nintendo Switch, and says even he is not as sold on this rumor as he was of the Resident Evil Village playtest rumors he also covered. And now we get into the final leaks from the title, which once again come from Dustgolem in June of 2021. He says that in the Capcom hack, he also found that Outrage was going to have a multiplayer mode to be released with the game on the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox X, and PC, but doesn't see a multiplayer mode as part of the Switch version. 4 characters were also found in the files, named Ralph, Saltzman, Hathaway, and Nestor. Early models for Ralph and Saltzman were found in the hack as well. And the last new information is that Leon Kennedy is the secondary playable character in-game, but even Dustgolem says to take this with a grain of salt, and he could not verify this with his normal sources. Alright, and that for the most part covers all the rumors and leaks that we have gotten up to this point. And the final collection of stories comes from a separate Nintendo-focused insider, Nate Drake, who has his own sources and made a series of posts in November and December of 2021 and discussed Resident Evil Outrage. He started by saying, quote, "It's best to forget about RE Outrage." And this post obviously invoked a reaction from fans, and he was asked if the game never existed or if the game is a Metroid Prime remaster situation. Nate Drake responded saying that the game did exist and still may exist in some form, and that fans who speculated that Resident Evil Outrage was a multiplayer game were right. And this is interesting because we do know there was a multiplayer component to Outrage, but Nate Drake makes it sound like this game was only a multiplayer game and never had a story component. He continued on and said that Outrage has likely been cancelled, and that Outrage was never the same game as the Resident Evil Switch game, and he isn't sure how these two games became linked for fans. So it's possible all the rumors about Revelations 3 are still true, and the game will still feature Rebecca Chambers and will be a Switch launch exclusive, but the game won't have multiplayer and won't be called Outbreak. And Outbreak sounds like it was a separate title we really never knew too much about. In the final relevant post Nate Drake makes, says once again that the Resident Evil Switch game was a project unrelated to Resident Evil Outrage, and he isn't sure if Resident Evil Switch remains an active project. And honestly, I'm not sure where this leaves us. There have been a lot of sources and credible insiders who have said that a big budget game with Rebecca Chambers is coming soon, and I tend to believe this was the plan at least at one point. And I would also believe that the Rebecca Chambers project is unrelated to Outrage, and Outrage could have been a multiplayer only project. It's also possible that the Nintendo Switch game is separate from all of this. All we can really do is wait, and it does sound like Outbreak is cancelled, but we could still see some of these other titles as soon as this year, and we'll just have to see if this game with Rebecca Chambers ever ends up being announced. Either way, that's where I'm going to end this video, and that is why Resident Evil Outrage was cancelled. As always, make sure to like and share this video, subscribe for weekly gaming news, and I will see you guys in the next one.